All right, it's time for Yogi and the BeachMan. Hi, I'm Jim the Yogi.
And I'm Rick Beach the BeachMan.
We're two Michigan transplants now living in Southwest Florida.
In fact, we're cousins born in 1964, just a month apart.
I like to meditate.
And I like to play bass in a band.
I'm into chanting Om.
And I'm into throwing down some classic rock.
But together, we're on a mission
to promote people that are helping other people.
We want to make the world a better place.
One conversation at a time.
So sit back,
turn up the volume,
and get ready to laugh.
Because we like to have fun
while we spread the love.
Interviewing lovely people, yes, we have fun.
I remember last time we talked, we were anxious to talk about something, but I forgot what we were anxious to talk about.
No, you did not.
We listened to the last, about 3 or 4 minutes of the end of the last
Oh,
one.
that's what I should have done. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
No, I just have some notes. Heck, but they'd make no sense. So go ahead, Jim.
Oh, we had talked a lot of politics and stuff, and you said you really wanted to get into the spirituality part.
Oh, okay.
We had talked a little bit about some things. And said, well, let's have you back because this is a much deeper conversation.
Well, what do you say? The iron is cold. What,
I know, we got to restart this, get it rolling first.
Well, it's like those barbecues, those nasty barbecues that you have to work at to get them lighted. Where do you want to jump off? My mind is like worrying. Do you want to talk about
Well, one of the things we said we were going to talk about was unconditional love.
And I have my notes say unconditional. My last note says unconditional love and Jesus.
Oh yeah, because you said that Jesus didn't preach unconditional love.
Oh, that's right. And if I would have known, I would have got some evidence of this. He had some.
you can find
actually
evidence.
Said that one of his apostles killed somebody because they lied about tithing to the church. And I was like,
he gets stricken dead.
Never heard that in my
it's
life.
In the
and
first,
I looked it up, and I was like, I could not find anything on that.
Oh well, I wish you would have brought that up, and I would have had my evidence of this because I read that myself.
Yeah, but I've in my experience, doctrinal evidence never convinced anybody who believes in other doctrinal evidence. I mean, your evidence doesn't trump their evidence. I mean, unless maybe you're the Pope and they're Catholic, it does. But in general, it's like it's a free-for-all in terms of doctrinal evidence.
Unless you take the Bible literally, then it is the evidence.
Yeah, but you can find. So, like, the thing I remember is the quote of turning the other cheek is interpreted as a passive act, but then it's explained historically as an aggressive act, because turning the other cheek means the person striking you has to use their other hand, and they're not allowed to use their other hand. They can only slap you with their left hand. They can't slap you with their right hand. So turning the other cheek denies them the opportunity to attack you. And so there's like, oh, well, I don't know. So is it an aggressive defense or is it a passive abdication? So, you get into these things and, does that convince anyone? I don't think so. My point is that there's a lot of interpretation, even if you take it literally, because it's not definitive.
That's why there's so many different Christian religions. They all take a different spin on all these things.
Yeah, I always wondered why there's so many Christian religions. Are there so many Islamic religions? Maybe not, because I don't know. I mean, there are, right? Sunni and Shia, right? So there are some.
Yeah, there are definitely some. Some are more fanatical, some are more loving. Some
Right.
look at the Quran as a book of love, just like the Bible. A lot of people look at the Bible that way, but others take it as a call to jihad. So,
well, don't get me into religion because I have no knowledge. I am completely ignorant, and I won't even attempt to, take a position.
That's okay.
But I mean, I can talk about religiosity, but I don't know details of religions.
Well, tell us a little bit about religiosity.
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 I just
Well,
recently came familiar with that word.
I would distinguish it from spirituality, right? So there's being doctrinaire versus being, what's the opposite? Personal, intuitive, uh, stuff like that. So I have a lot of resistance to being doctrinaire when it comes to what?
What
Therapy or
what word are you saying?
counseling?
What word are you saying?
Doctrinaire, following doctrines.
Oh, doctrine air. Okay.
Doctrinaire.
Welcome back to Yogi and the BeachMan. This week we are with Lincoln Stoller. Lincoln's rejoining us to talk spirituality because we had him on a couple weeks ago, and it really turned to depth in a political discussion. But he really wanted to come back and talk about some spiritual things. So welcome back, Lincoln.
So here we are.
Thank you. Thank you. Now we're hitting the hard stuff.
Yeah, and you were
Yeah.
just telling us about the term doctrinaire.
Well, I had said that I'm anti-doctrine because I don't find it engages people's intuition and their hearts. And since I'm a therapist, I shy away from things that are analytical and reductive. And I'm attracted to things that reveal people's hearts or, emotional attitudes. So I find doctrines a problem because they are kind of closed and written down in somebody else's language. And it's like debating. It's like, do you think that you're going to transform somebody's worldview by debating? And that's an interesting question because we do a lot of debating and we use our analytical minds all the time. But it's been my observation that the changes that occur in people are emotional. So it's kind of indirect. So like pushing on a string when you try to use an analytical argument to make an emotional point. And so
That is there's a lot in what you just said, using an analytical argument to make an emotional point. That's why it's, at least here in the States, that it's so divided, because that's exactly what tries to happen and it never works.
I don't think it works in therapy either. I don't think it works. Well, but you shouldn't disparage it too much because it's such a useful tool, being analytical, deductive, evidentiary, and demonstrative, and it's very useful. And I mean, I like mythology because, in a general sense, mythology is like the movies or theater or drama, where you're using a situation to usually evoke some emotional reaction. And it's kind of the counterpoint to being analytical and reductive. And maybe the crossover is like when you have these courtroom dramas that mix analysis with drama. I mean, they're not very. I used to watch, I am embarrassed to say, Perry Mason when I was small. I guess I
You're
didn't
dating
know any
yourself.
better. Yeah, but those, I don't see them very much anymore. But you read about them, right? In fact, a lot of the news is cast right now with the legal, the judiciary, and the executive branch, fighting over things. So we see that it's sort of like a courtroom drama again. But the idea that there's a whole sort of narrative arc, the investigation of the details and the revelation of the hidden details, and then the epiphany of the truth. Almost sounds religious, but so I don't disparage the fact that we can use analysis and sometimes be reductive.
Well,
But
isn't is it, if you're watching a news program or something that's for the masses, isn't or reading a newspaper, whatever, or even local news for that matter, isn't like one of the definitions of propaganda to provoke an emotional response in the receiver, because that takes out most analytical thought from most people if you get that emotion. And that is really how propaganda works. That's how I know to look for, that's what I know to look for. If I see something, whether it's from the left or the right or the religious thing, church, whatever, if it provokes an emotional response in me, where I'm sad or happy or
Well,
appalled
fearful.
or fearful, I always check. And then you just have to take a step back and say, hey, what's behind this? And why did it make me feel this way?
So like being afraid to go to hell, all this stuff of in Christianity about, if you're going to do this, if you're going to do that, or if you don't do this or you don't do that, then you're going to hell. Those are fear-based. And if you do
Well, they
do
are,
your
but
research on it, you find that a lot of this stuff, those people's own ideas that they wanted to put into this book to make you believe and act a certain way.
so we just switch gears into the propaganda of the Bible.
Well, propaganda. Yeah, absolutely. Because people that transcribed it put their own little twist on it.
Yeah, but we've went over this before, so we've already talked about this. But still, if you take the King James version literally, then book was, and Lincoln didn't want to get into this. He says not good at religion, and I'm not really either. I'm kind of a total rookie.
Well, it's always a big if to say if the King James version is the Word of God.
No.
Well, that's
I
a
didn't
huge
say
if.
that if it is. I said if you take it to be.
Okay.
That's a big difference.
Okay. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
All right, wait.
One, not saying it is one thing you take.
You guys
because
are
you-
lost. You're going around in circles here.
Yeah,
So,
we do that.
you preface it by saying if it is, and have doubts, and I say if
all right,
it is.
let me object to say that I appreciate.
This is where we left off last time, right here.
I appreciate your definition of propaganda, but I don't agree with it because, yeah. So you said propaganda is the use of sort of deductive or analytical stuff to evoke an emotion.
No, I said
is-
it doesn't. It's opposite of using the analytical deduction skills.
But you mean it's a misuse of it.
It's only designed to provoke an emotional response.
Okay, I understand.
Well, and amongst other things, political aims and ideologies, of course. But
Okay, okay. Yes, I think that could be emphasized. So, selling products, you've got the attractive woman selling, kitchen utensils, or the shady looking street person selling you on the need for insurance, or so there you've got an emotional trigger to get you to act. And okay, I appreciate that as propaganda, or Adolf Hitler saying God knows what he said to incite people to go nuts.
yeah, speaking of that, have you ever seen the AI translation? Those crazies at the Reichstag building is when he's going nuts. AI has literally put it into English.
Okay.
And it's nowhere near as crazy as it looks in German.
Well, I haven't seen it.
It could be a political speech today.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't be surprised because we haven't changed that much in many ways, right? Politically, technologically, and so forth. But there were unique things going on there, tensions and struggles and attitudes. So it's hard to compare. But going back to propaganda and going back to spirituality too, how do you talk about spirituality? Maybe you shouldn't. But, I keep thinking of, the I Had a Dream speech. So how much, there was an emotional speech. And that was its point. And it's funny. It's a funny speech because it does, what do we remember from that speech, Martin Luther King's I Had a Dream speech? Do we remember what he had a dream about? Well, yeah, I mean, it's sort of like that everyone's holding hands and everyone's happy. But the way he whipped it up, his oratory was very important. His management of the crowd, And the same thing with, the Gettysburg Address. Oratory was very important. These were emotional speeches, and they were very effective in ways that we try to copy, in fact.
Well, that I think would be more. I don't think either one of those two examples would be considered propaganda. I think because they're first person accounts, they're unfiltered, and more the power of persuasion of great orators.
Why not propaganda? Because they're not selling anything?
I mean, it's just, I think propaganda, well, I guess if you look at it, it would be intersecting, certainly.
Yeah. All right. Well,
But I would think that because I try to basically keep myself away from being propagandized by going to source materials. So if I'm listening to the I Have a Dream speech or reading the Gettysburg Address, I'm taking all interpretation out of the mix. I'm getting the facts raw. I'm filtering them through my analytical mind, and I'm going to make a decision. And I don't know if that really qualifies as propaganda.
I think you're right. You can diffuse it, but I'm not sure you're being the audience that was intended for that experience when you're
might be
doing that.
true. Yeah, you have a point there.
So, for example, I'm trying to get back to therapy and spirituality. So, here's what I do when I hypnotize somebody in a therapeutic context. I get them to immerse themselves in certain feelings that they would be familiar with. Comfort, usually, relaxation. And then I add to the mix, usually I'm trying to disconnect them from, current events and current situations and the room they're sitting in. And then I try to add into their mind the issues that are important to them in some sort of symbolic form. They're walking down the street, or they're walking on a beach, or they're in the woods. And then, for example, the characters that are bothering them appear in some form, either physically familiar form or symbolic, like a monster or a dragon. And then I encourage them to talk to these characters, to try to get below the stereotype. So, a dragon appears, you're walking in the mountains and you come upon a cave and you go into the cave and there's a dragon there. And, you fill it out with whatever you need, darkness, rocks, stones, danger. And you're afraid. And now the question is, the dragon speaks to you. What does the dragon say? So I've got you to imagine things, and hopefully you're comfortable with making stuff up. And then I've presented you with a conflict that you tend to avoid, like running into dragons. And I've put on this conflict some of your preconceptions, like danger or childhood fears. And then I've asked you to start talking in a reasonable fashion, or as if you're talking to a reasonable person, and express your fears. So this is like what we don't generally do, which is too bad. When we get into an emotional situation of distress or anger, we tend to get carried away with our emotion. And then we do all kinds of stupid stuff like not listen or just like, what's the word, emote, or even get violent or injurious, pound our hand on the table or slam the door or hit our heads or strike somebody else if it really goes overboard. And so I'm trying to say, well, let's get these let's bring these characters forward in some form where they can, if not discuss, at least reveal what they feel. And I'm talking about you and your mind and your preconceptions and the things that bother you or you're afraid of. So if I'm doing this, I mean, here we're sitting here talking like intelligent people. What a joke. That we, can, and you're evaluating, the evidence and so forth. But the reason that you do hypnotic work, which is not all that different from I had a dream speech or any otherwise hypnotic situation, is you want to get people emotionally connected so that they're not just back to their old, evidence-based, courtroom drama of this is what I believe in and you can't make me think otherwise. So the question is, what do you feel? You want to get people to a point of confusion, basically, where they're uncertain, where they're willing to confront opposites or conflicts and
So that being
admit.
said, how do you feel about beliefs in general?
I think there are things to get beyond,
Because
to
I
put
think,
it shortly.
yeah, I think people are so locked into their beliefs. I mean, I believe that everything Rick says is possible. I believe there's a lot of other possibilities, but people get so stuck in their beliefs that they can't look or see anything else.
But the word that comes to mind is fear. Usually you're stuck on beliefs to me are defensive. I mean, they could be inspiring too, but I'm thinking of them as defensive. They're kind of the bulwark against change, because change often is uncertain or chaotic, and carries the threat of loss or fear or disruption. So,
Beliefs have killed more people in this world than anything else.
but the
Fighting
question is, what's
over
under the
beliefs.
belief? Are you going to, so as you get two adversarial parties together, are you going to discuss beliefs? Are you going to discuss issues? Or are you going to discuss common values? This is an interesting question, because if you discuss what you disagree with, then you're probably going to continue to disagree.
Yeah.
There's, this, don't compromise. Compromises are bad because it's just two people agreeing to disagree and meet in the middle where they don't agree. But what's better than a compromise is a reformulation or reframing of things to everyone's benefit. I'm thinking kind of slowly, but the book called Never Split the Difference by, what's his name? Remember that book? Let me just
No, I never heard of that one.
get the author.
I don't want to
Chris Voss.
sidetrack you too
Okay.
far out of what you were talking about through
But
hypnosis.
so Chris Voss was an FBI negotiator, and his book about Never Split the Difference said that, you don't resolve a critical conflict, like a hostage situation by telling the hostage takers, well, we'll compromise, you kill half of them. This is not, and when you're trying to make a business deal, you don't say, well, we'll split the difference so that we both lose half. That's like the wrong attitude. The right attitude is reframing the whole situation so that you find agreement and both benefit. So you get two people with differing beliefs, like the Middle East or something, which seems like an endless war. What's that been going on for 2,000 years? And, instead of saying who gets to cut the baby in half, you have to reframe it in terms of, in terms of people being happy, what both people want. So it's not a compromise. And the beliefs don't seem immediately helpful.
Isn't that a Bible story reference to cutting the baby in half?
Yes.
I thought it was.
Right. That's Old Testament. That's about as far as I know. So that's my feeling of beliefs.
Didn't you say?
Who?
Didn't you say you were raised Catholic?
I was raised nothing.
Nothing.
But that's not really possible. My heritage was Jewish, so it was genetic, but not doctrinal. Um, and what were you guys? Were you raised something?
I'm a recovering Catholic.
And Rick?
Well, yeah, we're cousins in the same family, same here. So,
You had a little bit of other
but yeah,
mix
my
in there. Your
aunt,
aunt would take you to a Baptist church, right?
yeah, for a long time, and then when I got out of the Navy in my early 30s, I went to like a non-denominational church in Michigan for, I don't know, quite a while, 5-6 years probably.
Yeah, I've
And
been to
then
various congregations, but never been inducted to any of them. Anyway, beliefs. So I keep thinking that you guys tend to veer into the political and cultural, where I tend to stick to the therapeutic and the psychological. So we may have a difference in beliefs there, but I try to get individuals to see their beliefs as limiting. Of course, I'm as a therapist, people come to me with a problem. I'm not just wading into a happy group and trying to get them upset. They're already upset with something. So I'm here to resolve something, not to stir up trouble.
Sure.
And people pay me, so they don't want to waste my time, which would be the equivalent of wasting their money. So even if they don't like me, they'll listen to what I have to say, and then they just won't have me back again if they don't think they got value from the situation. And that's important because I will tread that line. I mean, that's the danger in my profession. If you say too much, then the person can't swallow it and they feel threatened and they leave. And that's happened to, a fair number of clients, especially when you're in the middle. You get a relationship problem and then you're seen as aligning yourself with one party or the other. And sometimes you do want to align yourself with one party or the other. But then the question is that what they want? It all gets very dicey because people have.
Well, I don't suspect that you're just doing what your patients want. You're trying to solve the problem. I mean, they want the problem solved, but the way of getting there isn't always the way they want it.
Oh, it's always not the way they want, because otherwise they would have gotten there.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So that puts you in a funny position. You're not. You know that what you have to add won't be entirely welcome. So the question is like, how do you finesse it? Or do you finesse it? My answer to that is, if there's injury being done, you don't finesse it. You stop the injury. And if they can't stop the injury, you don't work with them. Or you report them to Child Protective Services or something, as if that's going to help. But it's at least something. So what am I trying to get at here? You got a conflict, you're trying to resolve it. And, well, I think if people can understand spirituality, which is kind of non-denominational, which is to say, not just that, it's also non-belief. So it's also not racial and it's not cultural spirituality I'm talking about. So you can use it to bring people together. Even if you're talking about a single person's conflict in, a heartbreak or grief, you might use, I probably would use, spirituality as a way of getting their feet on the ground or getting their parts to agree with themselves.
Can you give us an example? Because I feel like I know a lot of people that have different definitions of what spirituality is. I'd like to know how you use it in therapy to bring people together.
Well, that's a good question. And I think the answer has to be as you believe it to be. So I could, what's the point of me trying to enforce my view of spirituality? What I'm really trying to do is integrate you. So I got to find what are the parts. It's like, I use this metaphor a lot, of a jigsaw puzzle. I'm presented with all these parts, and I have to find which ones fit together. And I could say, well, spirituality is the red part meeting the blue part. But if all your parts are like, kaleidoscopic colors, I don't know how to identify them. So I try to figure, well, maybe for you, spirituality is family and security, because maybe you grew up in a dysregulated family that didn't have security. Or maybe spirituality is meaning and purpose. So I'll try to evoke those things. Maybe not two, maybe three, I don't know what. Maybe you have some transcendent view that, you just feel virtuous, or you want to feel virtuous. I mean, what does that mean? I don't know. I ask you. So my answer, I think it was Rick that asked, was that spirituality means meaning and purpose. Those are the two broadest terms. And then I would ask you, what gives you meaning and purpose? What makes your life worth living? So here, back to hypnotherapy. I'll take you on a guided visualization to your death and ask you, what do you feel you accomplished or could accomplish in this life? And is it enough? And what is it missing? And I would call the answers to those questions spiritual. And they don't have to do with spirits or gods or following a doctrine. And so I would make that clear. It's not a belief. The answer to the question of what's spiritual is not a belief. And if you veer into that direction, then I'll object and say, that's just an explanation somebody handed you. But if your life depended on it, what would you really choose? Well, here's an ugly example. I have actually it's an ex-wife. Her mother said, who's a Calvinist, said, if I had to choose between God and my daughter, I would choose God. And I think that fucked up her daughter, feeling that she was never going to be good enough. Of course, the Calvinist idea is that you are, original sin, and that might have played into the whole story, that the daughter, like all people, was flawed. God was perfect. So who knows what she meant. But it was very disempowering to the daughter, who had other problems, and then was left to feel that if she didn't follow the, doctrinal line, she was screwed.
You said of the mom or the grandma? Because I 100%
The
agree
grandma.
with that.
It was the
I
grandma.
100% agree with that statement.
Which one?
That you should love God before your wife, and then your spouse second, or your life partner, and your kids third.
Well, you and I should fight it out. We should fisticuffs. Yeah, we'll solve our differences
determine the
No, I don't
by
have a problem.
violence.
And that's how beliefs have caused so many deaths in the world.
And I would look
Right.
and I would say that that for some reason the mother hasn't. I would say the granddaughter wouldn't have been raised in that type of atmosphere, or she would have understood that doctrine, so to speak.
I think she was raised, but I still don't think. Well, now we're getting into the realm of conjecture, but what the hell? So I think the daughter was abused sexually by the parents, and then to have your parents. I mean, this is another problem with belief systems. You tend to exonerate yourself. This is the whole sort of, perverted Catholic priest thing, because I believe in God more than my congregation, I can abuse my congregation because I believe in God. So I can turn it backwards.
No, you
What do you
can't.
mean? No. That's been happening for
You can't
centuries.
No, but those people are just criminal, and certainly I'll never defend the Catholic Church. I'll talk about pedophiles and that all day long. I find it distasteful. I don't really like to discuss it, but I know it exists, and sure, those criminals were covered up for, but that's a totally different topic. But they didn't
Okay,
use
I don't agree. I
the
think that
Bible to justify.
if you believe in your virtue based on some doctrine, then it can exonerate all sorts of behavior.
Well, then
and does.
Hmm.
And does.
So that's what I see as the problem.
We use it with our military. It's our God. We're fighting for our God.
Or you do it with your children.
Wait a
We do
minute.
it for a lot of things.
Wait, stop. You guys I'll call you on that. We're fighting for our God. We don't have religious battles. In the United States doesn't go fight holy wars. They fight against them.
I know a lot of people that were in the military that feel that when they're out there in the battlefield or fighting or doing their job, they feel like they're supporting the God we trust, and the other people are evil. They don't believe in Christianity or God the way we do, so they need to be taken out. There's people like that.
I would be foolish to say that there's no one like that, but I would not say, I'd say it's a tiny minority. Most of the grunts and the soldiers, Army, Navy, Airmen, they just go where they're told. And they do what they're supposed to do, which is kill people and break things. It's unfortunate. I don't agree with it, but I think maybe a very small percentage would rack that up to some religious doctrine of kill the Muslims or some other religious sect. So I'll call you on that, because there's no way it can be true.
Okay, I think it's
I
a
mean,
possibility.
It's a possibility that what would
Hey, well, here's an example.
10%? No
When
way.
the Trade Center was destroyed, there was a lot of anti-Islamic fervor, which made no distinction according to people and their personal beliefs. So, and it was pretty vitriolic and racist, and there was a lot of enthusiasm to go kill Muslims. And you could say, well, that really wasn't going to be the strategic plan. There was going to be much more careful and, surgical operation. But that was the enthusiasm that was dredged up.
Hey, I thought
at the
about it.
time.
I was 31 years old. I had a 3-year-old daughter, and after 9/11, and I had 6 years of U.S. Navy experience, so I could have easily went back in, and I considered it for quite some time because I was totally led down the path of all that propaganda that happened because of 9/11 or caused it, or however you want to put that.
Yeah, but don't you recognize that a lot of it was religious? Could have been otherwise. Could have been they were terrorists, or could have been, who knows? Could have been they're communist, right? I mean, that was another thing that flipped people out. The evil communists. And
Oh, well, no, we were all, I'm not even certain that they were responsible for that. So, I mean,
no, I'm not saying
there's a
they
whole
weren't.
bunch of up in the air. I'm not convinced any of the 9/11 Commission. I'm not
Yes,
that our
yes.
government didn't put this whole thing together.
Well,
So,
talk about propaganda again. Sure. But the point, well, I think the point was that, and another thing, there are a lot of these videos of World War II where there's, where the soldiers were gathered together and they listened to the pastor give some. So it plays a role. I mean, even in therapy, you're trying to get people motivated and committed to follow the rules or follow the orders or, enlist. So it plays a role. Now, there are going to be secular people who have a more analytical view. But let me get back to therapy again. You've got a situation where parents are abusing their kids. And I don't mean like pederasty or violence. They're just not supporting their kids. I mean, I see this in friends just the other day. The teenagers are angry about the parents, and the parents are angry about the teenagers, and it's being presented that there's too much screen time and there are not enough, intelligent activities, and they're at each other's throats. And I consider that incipient violence. And it's not even incipient. They're like sniping at each other and angry at each other, and they're both miserable. And
Describing our grandparents.
well, when you said screen time, I mean, that is, I think, a tool of abuse that we haven't even recognized yet. When you see a 1-year-old kid who can't just get away from this.
well, wait a minute. Let's talk about 1-year-old, because one's a little too much. Let's talk about teenagers who are just starting to have some autonomy, but they don't have enough autonomy to actually make their own decisions. And they have all kinds of stresses and forces that adults don't understand because of their, the current social environment among teenagers. So each person brings their own stress and tension. And then, as is typical of people everywhere, they project it outside on the enemy, who is whoever it is preventing them from being happy, or who is making them feel threatened. Could be the communists, could be your mother. And then from that develops antagonisms and differences, and then beliefs. I believe you're not doing this, or I believe you're doing this intentionally. I believe you're not building your life. I believe you're wasting our resource. I believe, I believe, I believe. And it becomes adversarial, and it's violent. Beliefs can easily be violent in my kind of soft definition of what violence is. They can be the justification for aggressive feelings. Beliefs can be the justification for aggressive feelings. So I see that as a problem. I see the beliefs more of the problem than the aggressive feelings. Because I'm always trying to look under things, or look at the bottom or the foundation of things. So you could say, yeah, we try to do that in politics and other things, but I don't think we do it very well. I don't think it gets very far.
You get to the bottom of it. You mean like get to the bottom of the belief, why somebody believes that way?
Yeah, and I think it's emotional. Just to tickle Rick again, I think you got to get down to the emotions.
For half, I believe you're correct. At least here.
So, okay, so we were trying to get back to spiritual. So I think spirituality and emotions have a lot in common. Or at least I find spirituality as a kind of lever to guide emotions in a collectively agreeable direction. So I would say to my parents and their argumentative teenagers, what's meaningful in your life? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to force your teenager to do their homework? Or are you trying to get a happy family? And they would say, well, I want a happy family, but I don't want my son to, be lacking in any skills, because then he'll, et cetera, et cetera. Disaster on the horizon. And, the son doesn't believe that, because he doesn't see that horizon. He sees a whole different thing, like social acceptance and people calling him stupid and various other things. And so I would try to get to, what do you both want? I don't want to compromise where, okay, you spend half an hour a night doing your dreaded homework, and then whatever. I want to know what all parties really want, and what are the things that are preventing them from that. So is this called spiritual yet? Am I there yet?
I think in some aspects, yeah. I think deep down what everybody really wants is love and acceptance. And I don't think there's anything more spiritual than that.
What do you think, Rick?
I'm still kind of dissecting. I would handle that a little different. I would tell my kid that, hey, you can do your homework and get the result that we both agree we want, right? Is you to have good grades, or you can not do your homework and suffer the consequences when your shitty grades come out, which we will then decide what that consequences are to be, therefore putting the responsibility and back on the kid to make the right or the wrong decision and suffer the consequences of both. That's how I raised my daughter, and I think it worked out pretty well.
So you would let them do whatever they wanted until the consequences came home to roost?
If you start that type of consequence-based decision-making skills when they're 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, 5 years old, like, hey, you can eat this whole box of popsicles, but if you do at 2 years old, you are going to be very, very sick. Now, of course, you would never let them eat the whole box.
Good thing they didn't grab the Drano.
But you know what I'm saying. So yeah, I always gave her the choice and the responsibility and the autonomy to make the right decisions. Now, once again, the Drano was not, sitting under the kitchen sink, but so that's how I handle that, and I don't see why that wouldn't be behavior to be encouraged, or a type of child rearing.
Well, I hate to be political, but I think that in some of those situations, people are being coerced, and you may not be recognizing what's being put on them. So, for example, in school, they are being taught boring stuff that feels irrelevant.
Hmm.
And the question is, do your homework and get a good grade, or object to the fact that you're being forced to do boring stuff that feels irrelevant? And my answer is, engage in it and be a part of the person's life and elicit from them, so that if you first engage the struggling person, you'll get their anger or upsetness. And you want to get beyond that and say, what is making you angry and upset? And they say, well, in this, simple example of kids and their homework, I can't do the homework. I don't understand it. It takes me hours and I'm confused and frustrated, and then I don't even get it right. And I don't understand what the teacher's trying to say, and I don't care anyway. So I would say, all right, let's look at this and let's see if you're right. And maybe it's being badly taught, or maybe it's bad information or useless information. And this is what I do, and this is what my struggling friends and their kids do not do. They don't help them with their homework, which doesn't mean make them do their homework faster. It means engage them with what bothers them about this project.
Well, of course. I mean, that would be like you said you would do. If my daughter would have came home with that, I'd say, come on, let's sit down, let's figure this out.
Here, I have an interesting example. So one of the big things on teenagers' list is sex, sexuality, gender identity, social acceptance. So I showed my son this famous picture of Sophia Loren looking at Jane Mansfield's breasts.
It's my favorite old time movie picture. I know exactly what you're looking at.
Right. But it's such an interesting picture because it mixes sexuality and celebrity and dominance and
Jealousy.
and jealousy and obscenity.
Envy.
Yeah. And I showed it to him. I said, look at all the weird stuff that's going on in that picture. And then just today, I probably because of Google and AI, was shown an article. Now, Jane Mansfield died in an auto accident, which was tragic. They were speeding, and there was no such thing as seatbelts, and trucks didn't have what's now called the Mansfield bar, which keeps cars from going underneath them and decapitating everyone. And in that accident, Jane Mansfield's 3-year-old daughter was in the back seat and survived. So today, I was just shown an article by Jane Mansfield's once 3-year-old daughter and now 30, 40-year-old woman, discussing her life story about what she felt about looking at that same photograph as the daughter, not as you and I look at it.
Right.
And I'm going to show that to my son and say, this is another aspect of this confusing photograph of sexuality and jealousy and, on and on. And the kind of trouble and despair that it all brings from the point of view of a child for whom this is supposed to be their mother. And it did distress her quite a bit that this was supposed to be her mother playing a national sex symbol who never actually got to grow up, neither the mother nor the daughter. The mother was killed, the daughter's still in middle age. So this is how I would engage. And this, I think, I could make the case, is a much more relevant lesson than the Pythagorean theorem and the identity of rhomboids, or, whatever the kid is being taught in math. And I think the kid would agree. And, you could say, well, why don't they teach about this stuff in high school? Well, then becomes a political question because school is really a political institution.
Very political. Yeah.
Yeah. So my answer to a lot of these problems is get underneath it, see what the person's problem really is about, because it's certainly got some truth to it, or they wouldn't be so exercised about it. At least they believe there's some truth. And there may be other things. So once resentment starts to grow, it sort of fuels itself. Now you're just pissed off that you can't come to an agreement with your parents who are supposed to be your protectors and facilitators. And now they got some attitude that you have the wrong attitude, and now you're just going to fight each other because you don't like the disagreement between your attitude. And that's what I would do with these people that I know who are at loggerheads with their teenager. I would sit them down and I would spiritually yell at them to say you're overwhelmed with conflict instead of focusing on the fact that you're really trying to love each other. I mean, where is love? I say this to my clients. What is love to you, actually? You know, you're talking about all your problems. I say, what is love to you? Why are we talking about what you want instead of what you don't want? And then they'll come up with some explanation, and which diverges away from spirituality.
Would you think that spoiling children up to those teenage years and through what is a poor thing to do?
Well, it depends what spoiling children means. You mean giving them what they want?
Yeah, without the consequences of just. I guess
I
it's
think
kind of a bad way to ask the question, because I was just going to tie this back in with what you had said earlier about the grandmother saying to the granddaughter. Because when you put your kids above your spouse and your God, if you're a Christian, you then put them on the pedestal to just set them up for failure.
I think the key is consequences. There has to be, or in another way of saying it, feedback. There has to be a system that actually works, not something that's just facilitated for some illogical goal. So let me describe my first son's school, called democratic schooling. Democratic schooling is where all the kids make all the decisions. Now you'd say, oh, they're all going to play and have a good time and be spoiled and never do anything. But there is feedback, because what everybody wants to do doesn't agree with what everybody else wants to do. So now there's a conflict. How do you resolve it? So, for example, let's see. One kid wanted to run around screaming through the school all day because he loved screaming and he loved running around and breaking things or hitting people or dropping stuff. But that had consequences with the other kids. And so even though these kids were just 8 and 10 years old, the nature of the school is that you bring your issues together and voice them. So the kid that loved to run around and scream and throw things got in hot water with all the other kids who wanted to sit around and play video games and play with their dolls. And the adults who in these situations don't take a judiciary role said, okay, how are you going to solve this? What's your solution to this problem? And the kids said, well, this one kid who runs around, he's got a baby step throughout the school, 1 foot in front of the other for the next 3 weeks and be absolutely silent for the whole day. This was like really draconian. And that was their solution. So that's what the kid had to do. So there was, you could say that's a ridiculous solution. It's never going to work. But since all the kids enforced it, there was no policeman separate from the people in the community. If the wild kids started to run around, everybody turned on him and said, you're not following, the sentence we gave you, and you're going to have to leave. And of course, that's, banishment is equal to death in a communal situation. So he would go back to baby stepping and being silent. And that was the way people learned in their own 8 and 10-year-old society about actions and consequences. And I thought that was wonderful, because it was unanimous, pretty much. And you didn't have adults telling you the rules or what their beliefs were or what you were supposed to do. And it wasn't about studying, learning. It was about building community and reconciling differences, which I think are much more important lessons for a kid than rhomboids, geometry, and dates of the Revolutionary War or something like that, or even grammar. So that's my little story about spoiling kids.
Everything you just pointed out, the area of a rhomboid, dates of the Revolutionary War, and grammar are all things I enjoyed learning in school.
Oh, that's fine.
Cool.
No, I'm just saying.
There are people like you. They're rare, but they exist.
Now, I hated English class and I hated learning about grammar, but when I always insisted, even all my grammar of even emails and texts.
Every text has proper grammar.
I try. I'm loose on some of that. And I've never used an emoji.
Or KK.
I don't know if I've done that or not.
I don't think so.
What is
But,
KK?
Like, okay. KK.
No, I haven't.
Really? I never used that. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, I mean, just to reinforce that, I think actions and consequences are the alternative to spoiling. And I think if you give people, letting people do what they want and seeing the consequences, I think we kind of agree on this, is a good way of establishing balance. And especially if you make it a real actions and consequences. So, I mean, do you let an angry person break things? Maybe if there are equitable consequences. I mean, it depends how you reach a person.
Well, I would think that in your example there, you'd be actually describing the democratic process, correct?
Something like that, I guess.
Which is why, not to bring politics into it, why the United States is not that democracy. Because in that case that you just gave, it's like 5 wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner. You've heard that analogy. And so that.
But wait a minute. If the world consisted of 5 wolves and a sheep, that would be fair, because the wolves got to eat, and the sheep doesn't have a hope in hell of surviving. So, sometimes, it's like 20 Neanderthals and a mammoth. That's dinner.
Well,
have you ever seen the World Peace Game?
No.
I think there's TED Talks on it. It was pretty famous, I think 10, 15 years ago, but basically they would break kids in a school up into different groups, and you were provided this big board, multi-dimensional. I kind of think of it like the game of Risk, but you've got your armies, you've got all the things that are in our modern society, you've got your resources. Everybody's got different amounts of resources, different amounts of armies or whatever, and all these different things. And they let the children play it out. But the only way, when it comes down to it, that you can actually win this game is when everybody starts to share resources, when everybody protects one another, when everybody looks out for one another, when everybody, takes care of one another health-wise. It's the only way you can win the game. But it's a huge eye-opener for kids, and it's kind of doing what you're suggesting through a game and not like real life.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in games and simulations in that regard.
The World Peace Game, I think you would enjoy learning about that.
Yeah, well, I do have a Kickstarter on a board game, but let's try to keep it in the realm of what people know. But games are in the realm of what people know. So, for example, to digress, one of the games I designed you could only win it by when the leader or the winner or the person who is currently winning collaborated with the loser. And I thought that was an interesting game, because if you tried to, take, just to win by yourself, the dynamics of the game you wouldn't prevail.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but see, here's the thing. People like novelty and excitement. They want to win. They want to fight often. Or they are pugnacious to begin with because they're upset about other things in the world.
Doesn't that almost equate to, the everybody gets a trophy kind of mentality?
Well, that is kind of what I think when I go to schools and see these lines of trophies in the glass case. Like, or everybody gets a gold star. But isn't that propaganda again? Like,
Doesn't that
do
diminish
your
the
work.
value of the gold star?
I think it reduces it to close to zero.
I would
But
agree.
people it still motivates them. So,
I don't know about that.
Some people, not all people.
well, you get rewarded. If a
Mhm.
gold star isn't enough, I'll give you a quarter. If that's not enough, I'll buy you a computer. I mean,
Well, well, those things have intrinsic value, where you know what I'm saying.
well, I'm saying the gold
When the
stars
whole
use
league gets a trophy, a participation award, then it diminishes the value of any of those awards,
right. Well, I don't
and
think
that's
any
kind of seems what you kind of where
professional
you're going
athletes
with that.
wouldn't be playing the game if they didn't get paid. They're not paying it for the trophies. They're playing it for the income, so some real value. But where's the spirit here? Does spirit have to have money? Does spirit have to have real value? Do you get people to commit for spiritual reasons?
I'm not following you. What do you mean?
Well, I mean, Rick's talking about gold stars and the worthlessness of a token. And I'm
Hmm.
saying, and then implicitly, like real value and real assets. And so I'm saying, well, if motivation is ultimately spiritual, does that mean you can be motivated without real assets? So we're
Well, yeah, you can.
without real assets. So what if what's the difference between faith and a gold star? I'm not sure I want to go there, but it feels like
No,
what.
That sounds interesting.
yeah, we'll leave it at that for part 3.
All right, where do we want to go with this? We wanted to talk about spirituality. Where do we
I
want to close?
actually almost stuck on that analogy for a minute because it kind of goes to me that thing of you and I've had it not only in Christianity but even in yoga. You accept this leader as your one and only savior and it's your path to heaven. That's kind of like the gold star. Yeah.
Right, and you're not
with
given money
with
for it either.
with some value. Yes, I agree.
All right,
Maybe.
have we come around full circle? Have we accomplished anything?
I think so.
We never really accomplished anything, do we?
Well, the message I have to, we have to get sort of doctrinaire about it and say, well, the message is do things that you believe in and
Wow. What?
reach for a higher level of understanding than the
Yeah.
level that created the problems that
Mhm.
you're struggling with. And if people would do
On
that,
that note,
it would open some eyes, I think.
Yeah.
no, that's good.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Always good to finish on a high note.
Yeah, yeah. Well, okay. I wish we had come to a more actionable conclusion. Go to my website, mindstrengthbalance.com, and
Okay.
read the material, and there's free stuff, and take a broad perspective on the resources that are available to you, not just mine, but all.
Before we go, so I was thinking about AI and robots and kind of envisioning the future of robots taking over a lot of jobs. And we were talking a lot about classrooms and stuff. Could you imagine the political effect, the overall effect of AI teachers, where every kid gets the same message, there's no variance, and they can program whatever they want the AI to teach?
It would depend on who the they is,
Well, it would obviously be our government, right?
at what level.
I don't see that's any different
At the
from
local school board
programming
or
a
at the
teacher.
federal. It
Yeah, but
makes a huge
teachers kind of
difference.
teachers put their own twist on it. Teachers do a lot of different things. This would be total mind control of all these
It
children.
depends on where the control lied.
Okay, okay,
If
yeah.
it depend if it's local or if
Hmm.
it's in a homeschool group,
I guess it
that could
depends
be
on
beneficial.
who's making the AIs.
Exactly. That's why it would be important to get specific on what you're saying,
Hmm. But
because
can't you see it though? Can't you
well, it's
imagine that?
for certainly coming. So That's why I'm scared to death of AI.
I mean, we're worried about the media and all the mind control the media has. Can you imagine if all our children were brought up mind controlled by AIs?
But
worse. It'd be
being
worse
caught
than it
by
is
mind
now.
control doesn't necessarily be being caught by AI doesn't necessarily mean being mind controlled. It's once again depends on who's running the show.
Well, for example, the kids I know in math class today are getting the same poor education in math that everyone else is getting, and none of them understand it. The teacher's not very good. The teacher doesn't give them individual instruction, and they're all lost and frustrated.
And they're not getting helped at home.
No. And a decent AI would say, what's your problem? A decent AI would say, the problem is not to cram this down your throat. It would be to get you to the answer the problems correctly by yourself. So if it's not happening,
that already exists today.
So I think, for many cases, a decent AI would do a more personal job than a, monolithic robot that has no program authority or autonomy.
Math's more black and white, but when you start talking about history and different subjects like that, like my teachers definitely influenced the way I think about the world
right
outside the history books by sharing different things and perspectives that weren't covered in the history books. So if you have an AI, you don't get those, different variances. It's going to be more like black and white. It'll be more like this is the past. This is what happened.
Not necessarily. That's just it's just harder to write. It's harder to make a good AI that's got the breadth of a literary teacher, but it can be done. I believe it can be done. It's just a harder problem.
Yeah.
Because like you say, math is sort of black and white, but math is not that black and white. There is transcendent levels to math. You talk about, relationships.
Quantum computing, is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm just talking about concepts like when does 1 + 1 = 1? And, what are situations that are unusual? The shapes of things or being the difference between a proof and a demonstration or what does infinity mean? Because like if you take two infinities and you add them together, what do you get? You get another infinity. You add any number of infinities, it's still infinity. But there are different kinds of infinity. So this is like interesting to some people. Or number theory, how many,
or how can you take something and multiply it by 0 and have nothing?
Okay. So, it seems obvious to me, but nevertheless, there are some people like Rick probably who can appreciate mathematical things better than other people. I mean, actually, isn't there some genetic evidence
we talked about Terrence Howard just a couple of days ago, and he has a debate on the next time he's in, I can't remember, Brett Weinstein. They went over that stuff, and him and Brett Weinstein argued 1 × 0 for 30 minutes. And I had never even, that just head hurting stuff I never cared about. And, but it was pretty interesting. So,
yeah, I think that's interesting. I wouldn't give Terrence Howard a minute of my time. I mean, I actually have given him several minutes, and that was enough. But, if it gets you thinking, and I think that's great because I think Terrence Howard is slightly an idiot, and most people know nothing about this stuff. So the conflict between knowing nothing and knowing something is where all the interesting stuff happens.
Yeah.
You don't just want to sit and listen to a bunch of, people who know everything. They don't tell you anything. You got to know the difference, and that's where the interesting the lion versus the gladiator. Let's see who wins. I wouldn't, pay to engage in that, but historically people love that kind of spectacle. Gruesome, awful stuff. Horror movies. I have people who love horror movies. Maybe you love horror movies.
Nope.
I
Some people
won't watch them. Don't like them.
Well, they've got well, let's talk about pornography, the thing that has generated all the profits of, the computer generation. Like nobody talks about it, but it seems, not me, not you, of course, but it's huge, huge business. Dead air. Okay.
We gotta go.
All right.
Well, hey, this has been great. kind of weird to leave it off on pornography, but there you go.
Yeah, I didn't expect that side twist there at the end.
Well, fix the world, man. Everybody's got to be a hero. That's what I say.
Yeah.
Hey, one hero at a time, right?
Yep.
One good deed.
Well, thanks for joining us once again, Lincoln. Appreciate your time. It's always fun to talk with you.
Okay, well, be religious and spiritual at the same time. And pornographic. Let's
Give it a try.
just let
Throw it all in.
crazy, really. Okay, guys, thanks a lot.
All right, man. Take care, Lincoln.
See you,
Yeah.
Lincoln.
So if you just listen to this podcast and you appreciate the content and the work that we're doing, we would love your support. Look in the comment section of this episode. Subscribe, rate us, comment. This gets our podcast in front of other listeners. And if you noticed, we don't have advertisers. For the cost of a cup of coffee, you can help keep it this way. Become a supporter right now. We'd appreciate it. I'm Jim the Yogi.
I'm Rick the BeachMan.
Peace.